Influenza will always be king of evolution.
The highly mutable influenza virus employs evolutionary tricks that keep it in continual circulation, crowning it the king of viral evolution. Seasonal influenza takes hundreds of thousands of lives each year and poses a looming threat with the ability to spark another pandemic reminiscent of the 1918 tragedy, which killed an estimated 50 million people.
There are no competitors when it comes to influenza in terms of its capabilities to evade antibody responses. When you're exposed to the virus, your immune system is trained to see that virus, identify it in the future, and extinguish it. And, if that virus is able to, change some of its outer coatings, then the immune system cannot see it detected as well, and it can reinfect you.
When you think about pandemic threats, not every pathogen has that capacity, but one that continually rises to the top of that list is influenza, because it's done it time and time again. It has been able to cause pandemics, and it remains the highest pandemic threat we face as a species.
Mutations arise in specific virus types that allow them to infect a new host species. This process, called spillover, can lead to a pandemic if the emerging virus spreads quickly through an immunologically naive population.
So one similarity between coronaviruses and influenza viruses, in both cases we know there are animal reservoirs that contain a huge diversity of strains, okay? So for the coronavirus, we're still working out what exactly animal reservoirs are, but we know that bats and rodents carry loads of these coronaviruses that can occasionally jump to humans. For flu, we know it's birds, particularly water birds, okay, like mallard ducks. So like a kind of simple metric of jumpability, how many times for each species it jumps, flu would rank number one. And coronavirus is a close second, I would say. And there are a few others that are pretty high, but flu is absolutely number one.
The continual accumulation of mutations in influenza viruses produces a phenomenon known as antigenic drift, which compromises the effectiveness of flu vaccines.
Antigenic drift is, the real challenge and problem with influenza, and it explains why we have to get revaccinated every year.
With influenza, you have a genetic structure that really engenders itself to mutate a lot.
Once the right combination of mutations occurs that allows it to not just infect domestic poultry or pigs, but finally adapt to humans.
The ones we worry about a lot are in this protein called hemagglutinin, because that's what our body makes antibodies against. So if you get a mutated hemagglutinin, the antibodies from last season may not work against this season's version.
Influenza viruses accomplish the massive genetic changes necessary for spillover by swapping large segments of their genomes through a mechanism called antigenic shift.
So in addition to antigenic drift, sometimes flu viruses undergo something called antigenic shift. And there are certain animals, for example, birds, even humans, and pigs, where they can be infected with more than one strain at a time. And what can happen is that those gene segments can reshuffle, and you end up with something completely new. That is why we call it an antigenic shift, because it's not just a little drift. It's not just something minor. This is a whole new virus that's coming out. And when you look at our pandemics that occurred, for example, in 1918 and 57 and 68 and 2009, those were all represented by antigenic shifts, where something completely new came out.
It can take these leaps in evolutionary space that acquire these entirely new segments. And, that has proven really important in, zoonotic transfer and the ability of viruses to evolve the capability to jump from an animal host to a human host.
So a novel influenza virus would be a virus, probably it's an avian virus that's come in, it's picked up some human genes, some bird genes, kind of jumbled around a little bit. It's a new genetic configuration, and our immune systems have not really seen it before, and that means it will spread rapidly through the population, that none of our existing seasonal flu vaccines will work for it. And very often these avian viruses are highly pathogenic. So they can kill poultry and they'll kill humans as well.
To protect the world from influenza variants created through drift, shift, and spillover, researchers are pursuing a universal influenza vaccine, or UIV.
So the idea of an influenza vaccine would be a vaccine that can recognize as many of those different antigenic subtypes as possible. So universal implies every single one. That would be very hard to do, but at least to recognize some of the major groups that we have most likelihood of jumping into humans.
And knowing all the cards in the hand of the virus, meaning all the different variants that are out there, and being able to develop vaccine antigens that would protect against that whole diverse family of viruses would really give us a huge leg up.
I think UIV is those sorts of initiatives are actually now completely imperative. We have to have them prepared beforehand in the freezer, ready to bring out when we need it, not have to wait 2 years.
As part of the effort to develop a UIV, researchers are applying new technologies to identify and target influenza variants that pose pandemic risk, wherever they emerge.
So genomic surveillance, immunological surveillance, and social media surveillance, that's we need to build that in going forward now very clearly.
One of the newer technologies which I think is really revolutionizing what we can, the amount of information that we get, and this has to do with surveillance, is the use of next generation sequencing technologies.
New technologies are really allowing, this sort of democratization of next generation sequencing, and these portable technologies that we can now go straight into the field. We can do the training, and we can teach people how to use them, but sort of building permanent infrastructures across the world, and particularly in places where zoonoses and emerging infectious diseases are most likely to occur. That's something that is really deserving of investment.
Having the ability to quickly deal with an emerging virus, even if it's a local outbreak, would be incredible. We need to make sure that technology is affordable for the country, that the sequences are equitably available and distributed. So if we could get everything in place where it is transparent, it's equitable, and there are the economic resources, you could very quickly say, we've got something that's emerging, we can make this technology, and it's affordable that we can get it to our population.
I think it's just a matter of time in which we will be able to fully use sequencing to link genetic mutations to antigenic characteristics of the virus. So right now, the process of choosing the right antigen for the vaccine is very tedious, and I think sequencing can speed that up. And eventually, it's going to help us towards a universal vaccine.
What we're looking for is a universal flu vaccine, one that would be able to induce an immune response that would protect against all the relatives, cousins, and distant cousins of influenza that are out there in wildlife that are just waiting for us to make a mistake.
And if we can finally end influenza's reign of terror by achieving universal vaccine protection?
Oh, it would, save economies billions. It would keep people out of hospitals. It would keep people at work. It would prolong life and the quality of life.